What does it take to achieve greatness? Do you know? Our hero did not, and it almost cost him everything. But he learned this strategy, and so can you. One animal, one bone, and one adventure to unite them. This is the story of the Mad Dog. Once upon a time, there was a dog. Now, there are two types of dogs, ones that are born with much, and ones that are born with very little. Our hero was born with next to nothing at all. He would often go wandering through town and see the other dogs. Each of the other dogs had themselves a bone. How he was jealous of them with their juicy bones. How he wanted to sink his teeth into one, but alas, he never could. Every day as he would walk by, the other dogs would mock him, saying, "Hey, where's your bone?" Knowing full well, of course, that he had none. And he would just stare at them with such hatred, which of course is how he got the nickname, the Mad Dog. One day he was walking through the square when he heard an elder dog telling a tale, an ancient story of an old bone, the largest bone in existence. He stopped to listen a while. The tales of its glory and how to achieve it. He wanted that bone. He needed that bone. He said to himself, "If I don't get that bone, I'm going to go mad." So he talked to the elder and said, "Elder dog, tell me this. Where can I get this mighty bone? The biggest bone in all of the world." And the elder said, "Well, of course, it is on top of the tallest mountain." "And where is the tallest mountain?" "Well, it is in the middle of the largest forest." Well, nobody said it was going to be easy. Great achievements are never easy, after all. But he asked with determination, "Why is it known as the tallest mountain and the largest forest? How can we tell?" And the elder said, "Because no matter how long your journey, none has ever made it through." And of course the Mad Dog was taken aback by this. Well, if no one's ever done it before, is it even possible? What chance have I? I've no great armor, I've no wealth, no supplies, but he had to have that bone. So the next day, he got up bright and early and set out onto his quest. But before he was able to leave the town, the elder stopped him. "Wait! Do not go yet! I have something I must give you!" The Mad Dog was puzzled by this. What could the old man have for him? "A gift for you." And in his teeth, he handed over a pair of earmuffs. "These will block out all sound if you wear them upon your ears." The Mad Dog, puzzling, took them around his neck to keep for later. "And one more gift. This is a blindfold." And handing it over, he said, "If you put this upon your eyes, you will only be able to see right below your feet." It was a sort of bandana that blocked everything around him, but he could still see straight down. The dog took it upon his neck and said, "Thank you. But why are you giving me these things?" The elder simply looked at him and said, "When the time is right, you will know." And with that, the Mad Dog left the town and began his journey. After several days of travel, he was finally able to make it to the forest. He was intimidated by the scale of the forest, but he put one foot in front of the other and walked inside. He looked around, stopped for a moment. "So that's really all there is to it?" Easy enough. Kept walking forward down the path, and there was only one path in this forest, the one that led straight to the mountain. He kept walking, looking around, but as he kept going into the forest, things got stranger and stranger. He almost felt like he'd hear a drum beat in the distance. "What could this be?" he said. "Is my mind playing tricks on me? Am I already weary from the journey?" But no, he continued further, and that drum beat got louder as he went further in, until he could distinctly pick up the rhythmic pulse of music. It was quite clearly a deliberate drum beat, set to a tune. He could hear the fifes playing and the strings as well as he got nearer and nearer, until eventually he was right next to it. He looked off to the side and he was able to see in the distance the firelight. Of course, this was off the path, but curiosity got the better of him. And so he decided, "I'm just going to go and look. Perhaps there are people and they may be able to help me as I have very little supplies." So he left the path and went into the forest and saw the fire. It was not long until he came across a clearing. And there were people dancing. They were having great fun. As he strode closer to the firelight, they looked at him and they saw him, and they seemed excited to see him. "Hello there, traveler, come and join our merriment." And for once in his life, it seemed someone was looking forward to spending time with him. Someone wanted to see him, and that was something he could not deny. So he went forward, he joined them. "Well, what are you doing here? Can't you see we are having a party?" "Well, I can see that." But before he could ask another question, they said, "Well, come and join us for a dance." "No, I could never. I am on a journey." "But it can wait. Just join us for one dance, that's all we ask." It was just one dance. Why not have a little bit of fun on this adventure after all? So he joined in the merriment, and admittedly he had a very fun time. He was laughing, dancing, and finally by the end of the song he reluctantly said, "Alright, thank you all, but it is my time to leave. I have a quest I must go on." But they stopped him, saying, "You must at least grab some food before you go on your quest. You must be starving." Being poor, he was, in fact, starving, and he was not one to deny a meal, especially not a free one. "Alright, I'll try some of your food." And it was just normal food, nothing magical about it, but it was delicious. He stopped to think to himself, this place isn't that bad. Minutes turned into hours, till eventually it was sundown. And finally, as the party died down, he said, "I must leave. I cannot stay here any longer, but it has been a great time having you." And they asked him, "Well, where do you have to stay? We have a bed made for you already. You might as well spend the night here." And they had a good point. He did not have anywhere to sleep, so he thought, well, what's one night? Hours bled into days. "Why would you want to leave? You have everything you could want here. Don't you feel happy for once? That's why we're all here." They would say, "All right, I'll stay." He truly did want to leave, but just not yet. Days led into weeks. For the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged somewhere. But there was one thing missing. Although he was having fun, there was an emptiness starting to build inside him. An emptiness at his meaningless existence, living in a place of eternal bliss, with no purpose. One night as he was laying in bed, his mind started to wander. He thought of his home. He thought of the elder, and of the tales of the great bone that he was out to get so long ago. He slept that night very poorly, dreaming of bones, and of that which he could never attain. The other dogs that would laugh in his face, and how he was just proving them right. He woke up in a cold sweat, hands shaking as he knew what he had to do. There were no bones in this place. He wanted that bone. He needed that bone. He said to himself, "If I don't get that bone, I am going to go mad. But how can I leave this place, when every time I try, they offer me something I cannot deny?" And then the words of the old man came back to him.
"These will block out all sound if you wear them upon your ears. When the time is right, you will know."
He knew what he had to do. The earmuffs, all along, was still on his neck after all this time, and so with his paws he nuzzled them over his ears, and he couldn't hear a thing. Only the muffled sound of music, which blocked out all other noise. With determination, he decided to leave the camp, back into the way he thought he probably came from. The people tried to stop him, yelling after him. But of course he couldn't hear. He started to run now, faster than he's ever ran in his life, and of course they all chased after him, but they could only go so far before deciding to turn back to their endless, meaningless bliss. And so he ran, longer and harder than he thought he could ever run. He must have went for hours, till eventually he stumbled upon the path, and with heavy breath, he set his sights back on the mountain in the distance, and continued forward with an angry determination. After a few days of travel, he was eventually able to make it out of the forest and to the foot of the mountain. There he found two things that puzzled him greatly. On the ground in front of him, going up the mountain, was a red string. The string was tied to the base of a sign. That sign had one word on it: follow. It seemed simple enough. He was able to put together that if he followed the red string down the path where it went, he would eventually make it to the top of the mountain, or at least, so he believed. So on he went, gaze fixed on this red string leading up the path in front of him, and he would follow it. Switchback to switchback, mile after mile, he kept going up the mountain. After what felt like ages, miles, his legs, they started to give out. It had been quite some time since he had truly taken care of himself, and his body was starting to break. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He needed to find a place to rest. By the guess of it, he was about halfway up the mountain, at least so he thought. He was just questioning if he could even make it to the top when finally he stumbled upon another sign, similar but not quite the same as the one at the base of the mountain. This sign said two words: rest stop. Now in normal situations, if you see a sign that says rest stop and an unknown path going who knows where, of course, you would not want to follow that. And the mad dog knew this, but he was getting desperate. There was no shelter out on the path where he was, and so what is the harm in seeking refuge down this other path? Perhaps it leads to a cave somewhere, or some other kind of building. And so he went. down the path where the sign said rest stop, traveled a ways, and finally he found a nice covered area that had a soft place for him to rest his feet, and he sat there for a bit, regaining his strength. He fell asleep, and when he woke up in the warmth of this shelter, he realized he didn't know which way he came from. Did he come from that path, or that one? And of course he had no idea. All he could do was try his best and go for the path that he thought was right. He was not, in fact, right. He wandered down this other path. That path led to another fork, which led to another path, which led to another fork, and he kept going and wandering around for what felt like just as long as he had been climbing the mountain in the first place. One path seemed to take him up the mountain. Next step it would take him down, till eventually he did find the red string again. Rejoicing, he went up to it and said, "At last I have found the path." But as he looked around, he realized he was not far from the base of the mountain. All his progress was lost. In dismay, he did the only thing that he could do. He fixed his gaze on the red string and kept walking. He walked for quite some time. He was not at all thrilled about having to redo most of the hard work that he had already done. He was so close to his journey's end, he could almost taste that bone in his mouth, but he was not quite there yet. He grew impatient, and when one grows impatient, one also grows weak. He would often look away from the red string, looking at the other paths that seemed to go up the mountain much quicker, ones that he could see for quite a ways. He wanted to follow the red string, but he had already wasted enough time. He had seen where the red string goes. The red string would wind back and forth around this path that seemed to take the longest way around to get to the top of this mountain. He was tired of it. He'd already tried that way once. Look where it got him. So he decided to take a shortcut. He left the red string. His gaze wandered to the other pathways, and finally he found one that just seemed too good to pass up. So he went down the pathway to the mountain, and he made good progress, or so he thought. It seemed to go up much quicker. He was getting tired, but not so much as to exhaust himself. But soon the path took a turn for the worse. The ground he tread on became treacherous. He soon got to a place where he could not pass at all without risking falling down the cliff. And of course, a big juicy bone is no good if you are a pile of bones yourself. And so he went back down the shortcut and to another split in the road. He wandered around for quite a bit, a day or more at least, it seemed. The higher he got up into the mountain, the more mystical it seemed. The less he kept track of time. How long had he been on this journey? 2 or 3 weeks? 4? 5? He didn't know. It didn't feel very long at all, and yet somehow still felt like an eternity. Eventually, he finished wandering and made it back out the shortcut, and to his dismay, he came out exactly where he entered. This side road had taken him up the mountain, but then back around again, all the way to where he was originally. Discouraged, he mustered his strength once more, but his spirit was waning. There was not more of this he could handle. His body was certainly giving out, and his spirit was giving out, and his mind would soon follow. So on the mad dog went up the path, gaze fixed this time on the red string. He did not go off the road for any side path. He did not go off the road for the rest stop when he found it again, and he kept going, doubly as far as he went before. And just when he thought he reached the top, he found it. The sign that said, "The Great Bone." It was within a cave, fit for such a majestic item. It was sparkling from the inside. He could see the glimmer. And so he left the red string for a third time, and went into the cave. And as he went into the cave, he found crystals growing from the sides, from the ceiling, glimmered with a strange light, as though the rays of sun that made it in were not just redirected, but amplified by these crystals. He made it to about the middle of the cavern when the sun rose. As the rays of light began to enter the cavern, they began to blind him. He swiftly covered his eyes, but he was in so much pain. The light was so intense that it nearly took his vision from him. Covering his eyes tightly, he was able to feel around to the end of the room. The light so intense he could almost feel it on his skin. But eventually he was able to find a wall and followed that wall to the outside. As he exited the cave, now the snowfall on the rest of the mountain seemed to amplify the light just as much as before. His eyes hurting. He couldn't look in front of him anymore. Couldn't look up anymore. He couldn't look around anymore without searing pain in his eyes. He wandered around a bit, but could not find the red string. He didn't know what to do anymore. He couldn't afford to keep walking and walking. He couldn't afford to spend another day going back down the way he came. In fact, he couldn't afford to do much at all. With his last ounce of energy, he stumbled to his feet, walked outside, and sat down in the snow. He was so tired. His bones ached, his muscles were on fire, and his soul is the one that suffered damage the most. After all this way, after all this journey, how could he come so far and fail right at the end? By this time, the wintry snow was freezing him all the way through. He could no longer feel his paws. He had very little energy to do anything. All he wanted to do now was accept his defeat. Finally, lay down and rest. Forever. So as he sat and he laid down, his mind began to wander, drifting back to home, of the old man. And he remembered the bone, that bone that he desired so strongly, that bone that the others mocked him for not having, that one chance that he had. He wanted that bone. He needed that bone. And he told himself, if I don't get that bone, I'm going to go mad. So with his last ounce of strength, he got up, and he found the string again. And then he remembered the words of the old man.
This is a blindfold. If you put this upon your eyes, you will only be able to see right below your feet. When the time is right, you will know.
The blindfold was still around his neck. He slipped the bandana over his eyes, blocking out all light except for one place, and that was right between his feet. He could see the red string and nothing else. He could not even see a foot in front of him. And with that, he walked on, blocking out all distractions. He could not hear, he could not see. All he could do is continue forward. And so he did. Though there were many side roads, though there were many other signs, though there were many temptations, he blocked them all out. And with a fierce stare, he went forward. Till eventually, the storm broke. There was no snow. It was just a simple calm, an easy wind. And as the slope started to level off, that's when he knew he had reached, finally, the top of the mountain. He ventured a glance, took off the blindfold, and there it was in front of him. After all this time, he had finally found the bone of legend. He had won. When he finally returned home with this magnificent bone, all the other dogs looked at him in such awe, such jealousy. Finally, he had achieved his goal, and those that mocked him were silent. Those that he once envied now envied him. The elder greeted him with surprise.
My boy, I thought I would never see you again.
But the mad dog seemed puzzled. Well, I was only gone for what must have been 3 weeks.
My boy, you have been gone for over 300 days.
The mad dog was shocked by this, but he was not bothered, for no matter the cost, he had won. And he said to the elder dog, if it was not for your help, for your gifts, for your wisdom, I would never have made it to the top of the mountain. The elder gave him a look of pride as he said,
You have done very well, my boy.
The other dogs went up to him and said, how were you able to do this? How were you able to get the bone that so many have sought and so few have actually found? And he said that the answer was simple. All that he had to do was cut out all distractions. Though people may call and convince you, you must shut your ears to them. Though they entice you, you must not listen. Although your gaze may wander to all sorts of tempting options, you must keep your eyes transfixed on the goal. You must keep your prize and your victory at the front of your mind at all times, staring it down with fierce determination, like a mad dog. And so, traveler, we too often get distracted by the things around us. In this world, there's always someone fighting for your attention. But if you want to get your goals, you must not let them take it from you. That being said, we must also understand that we cannot do everything, if you'd like. I have another story that needs to be told about a young boy named Max who learns that same thing. When faced with impossible odds, sometimes all you can do is the best you can.